How's it going, everyone? So by now, a lot of you have seen Marvel's Eternals already. So I just wanted to go over and sort of dissect Marvel's Eternals. So let's get into it. The first point that I want to make is that all the points that I am making are not to copy other people, and I didn't make these points after watching other videos. I actually watched the movie and took notes with my wife while her and I watched it together. And understand that this is my first video in the series of videos that I will be analyzing, but I don't hate this movie. It's relevant right now, so I would like to address all the things that I like and do not like about it, because all movies deserve love and criticism. So if deviants are dead, then they should have fought Thanos, because he would have been the greatest threat to humanity and its survival. There was no guarantee that things would be put back to normal, and it delayed the emergence by a great deal of time. And it feels like it's kind of a weak plot point when they mention that that's the reason that they didn't fight Thanos. Especially when Ajax had a direct line with the guy who could have said, okay, go do it, and let them help out. In the very beginning, I loved the lore of the characters in the title. It made sense, and it kind of started us off like the Star Wars-esque, this is kind of what's happening and these are who these people are kind of thing, and it led into the story fairly well. The beginning also does well to display the characters' abilities right off the bat, but it did feel a little bit shoehorned in because there are so many characters, and we're not going to have time to get to know all of them. A problem that I had with this movie is that the Eternals say that they don't have any direct conversation, connection, and relation to these people, and they can't help protect them only if deviants are involved, but they're directly involved almost the entire movie. People even talk to them, creating relationships in the world around them, pushing technology forward, and even creating weapons of war, but they won't do anything to stop the war. It seems rather counterproductive. They enjoy being worshipped and having friendships and teaching these people where they can be relied on against the monsters in certain types of regions. Take note that they don't really show themselves in Caucasian agents in the early years to kind of lead them away from war, which happens to the Aztecs or the Mayans later on in the movie. So it doesn't seem like a well thought out universe when it comes down to who they actually helped out, because when they did talk about helping the United States during World War II, it was in a negative light because it was only about the destruction of Nagasaki rather than any other thing that they could have gone with, such as the invention of the automobile or, name your thing. But that's just an observation. It just seemed a little bit negative. It's kind of like, an attack against the U.S. of like, this is the only really crazy thing that you did. This is the thing that we're going to highlight is the destruction. Like, they could have gone with any other nation during some kind of thing. They could have gone over Nazis because everybody hates Nazis, especially with the whole white supremacy conversation going on right now. They could have gone after literally anything, but they went after the U.S. and the attack that followed Pearl Harbor, not necessarily when the planes were created that came from the steam engine and actually created engines and stuff like that and bombed and killed thousands of people. They went straight for the single bombing of Nagasaki. So that was a little interesting. One of the things that comes to mind as well is Icarus the representation of Superman, and his downfall is a reflection of how Marvel is essentially boasting on their beating DC in sales and relevance. DC right now is going through its own little spiral that's being created, so it's really interesting that they would shoehorn in a character that is, I say shoehorn a lot, I apologize about that, but it kind of is. They shoehorned in a character that is basically a Superman, and people call him Superman fairly often, and he is this very powerful being and stuff, and in the end he has this downfall that ends up happening. So it just seemed like a representation of DC in and of itself, how DC is getting the downfall while Marvel is rising farther than they are. One of the cool aspects of the movie that I actually found really interesting that I've always been wondering is, where did the Celestials come from? I mean, I could have read the comics, I could have done that, but I wanted to know how the movies were going to actually portray this, and I really appreciated that they actually answered this, although it was kind of in a pretty terrible manner that they actually exist. But it's really interesting to say, okay, so the Celestials are this amount of old or this age or whatever, or they can live this long, and they are absolutely the creators of the universe around them in the Marvel universe. They have led to the creation of life, even though it's sort of a Transformers Unicron sort of way. Apex predators in an ecosystem is necessary. That's the point that they make in the very beginning of the movie. But the Celestial believed that it wasn't. So what point was the movie trying to make? Because when it was pointed out that Arishem the Judge created the deviants, it was to stop predation from other animals who they themselves became predators. It's a big counterproductive plot point that they drive throughout the movie, because are predators important or are predators not important? Because they say that you're trying to drive up the intelligence of the creatures in the world while also killing the predators that would also drive up the intelligence of the... It's a weird plot point that they made, but, you know, that's what they did. I feel like they could have explained it a little bit better or picked a different thing that they said and other predators thrived or whatever, you know, but they really didn't. So it made it just a very circular theory that went around in my head, and I don't know, I just kind of had to be like, okay, great. For the characters, I felt like there was almost too many. The movie had a big cast, which it helped and hindered it, I felt. Sometimes I feel like there wasn't enough time on all the characters, which made them feel almost boring. It led me to not caring or empathizing with their emotions. What was happening around them didn't seem to matter to me. I didn't feel sad over stuff because I didn't know the characters well enough in order to feel the loss that was actually happening. There wasn't anything that I was actually feeling sad about, you know? When Ajax dies, it's sad, yes, because main characters dying is something that's going to drive everybody else to be sad, but I didn't sympathize enough with all the characters because I didn't know Ajax well enough. She died, and I got a couple minutes of screen time understanding her throughout the movie, but there wasn't anything that really made me feel like, oh dang, I'm gonna miss this character. In addition, every character had something unique about them that made them more diverse or otherwise, more than they already are with their powers, which seemed a little unnecessary for a superhero movie, especially when we find out that they're created perfectly every time and replicated over thousands of years. Each of the major and good characters seems to be some sort of minority when it comes to their presentation, and that's not a bad thing. However, it almost felt unnecessary to the character arc. I understand that there is a gay relationship and the straight relationship and whatnot, because that seems to be commonplace in sexuality and conversation nowadays. However, it is that a deaf Makari would even exist after being confirmed as being a creation from an all-knowing entity and a child that wants to be an adult with a sort of reverse pedophile thing. Not in the grabby sense, but in the mentality. It was like the childlike mentality and stuff. Anyways, it's this whole thing that I could go into, but I don't really feel like going into. It feels like, why do they all have these certain quirks and stuff like that if they are like the deafness or the personality traits and stuff like that weren't necessarily corrected? Like Angelina Jolie's character slowly went mad because she had all these memories or something like that, but if the memories are erased, then why is that? And I thought that they made them perfectly every single time, because if you look at Circe walks into the building with all of the robots being placed out where all of them are being replicated, they're all perfect and exactly the same. So why is it that they would create those kind of characters over and over and over again if there are some flaws in them, such as being deaf, which technically speaking it is a flaw, I'm sorry to say. In terms of the cast, I felt that the strongest actors that had to work the hardest at their work would have been Gemma Chan, who was Circe, and Angelina Jolie. Many people might disagree with me, but they faced the most challenges working as a character with degrading mental health, and everything seemed to be happening to Gemma, so she had to be adapting emotionally, dealing with her family dying and turning against her, which not many of the other characters seem to have any screen time dealing with. In that same sense, when Ajax is found to be dead, I didn't feel like anyone was sad as they should have been, except for Circe and Sprite. Think about it. You only know these few people, and the person who you've looked up to for 5,000 years dies, and only a couple of them were really stricken by it. If I knew someone for 5,000 years and they died, I wouldn't be able to handle myself. If you think about your mother or your father or your siblings, God forbid any of that stuff happens, if any of those kind of things were to happen and they died, you'd be wrecked. If you have any sort of positive relationship with them for more than 10 years, I can't imagine what it would be like. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose my mom or my dad or even any of my siblings. I've known them for 20 odd years now, and I would not be able to handle myself. I can't imagine knowing someone for 5,000 years and then just being a little sad over it, you know, or a little angry over it. It just didn't really make sense to me because I would be a broken person. It doesn't make sense. So I was kind of bummed out about that no one really showed themselves in such a sad way. In terms of their cosmic energy, they say that they're imbued with infinite cosmic energy, which is why they don't have the ability, they have the ability to regenerate and they don't age. So either they cannot be killed or they have finite energy and they shouldn't have made the plot point. It kind of ruins the illusion of risk. What happens is they talk about we are imbued by the celestial and we have this infinite power. It gives us our powers, it ensures that we live forever, and it heals us and all these other things that go along with it. But then they get hurt, They have people die. They don't heal like they say that they're going to heal. And it's just very strange that they made that plot point of we have infinite power and all these other things, but at the same time, we are finite. And it was just kind of a counterproductive point, because it's like, well, if you make these points, just kind of stick to them, because it would have made the story more interesting, because it got rid of the idea of risk. Because if you say we have finite energy, we only live for 5,000 years, or we only live for 7,000 years and we're reaching the end of our lives, that would put a timeline on the actors and their ability to play the role. And in addition, when you have those kind of things, you can fear for them. They say, I only have so much magic left in order to keep myself alive, or cosmic energy, or whatever you want to call it, in order to keep myself alive. Then absolutely it would add some sort of risk, because their only risk at that point was the humans dying from the deviants. But if you add on that, yes, we are mortal in some way, shape, or form, that would add a new risk and a new way for the audience to actually be worried for them when something happens. Because if they are absolutely invincible, I'm not going to worry about them dying. And then when they die, I say, oh, there's a plot hole right there that should have been addressed, or didn't even need to be mentioned, you know? In terms of lines and delivery, I felt like they were kind of corny. Fairly often, actors were kind of walking through scenes, relying on CGI to do the work, and characters slurred words, looked bored, and had very old backstories, yet seemed to be so one-sided. You got people that are 3,000 years in order to create this personality out of nothing, because they are, for the most part, other than Sprite, grown adults. And then they have the ability to come up with these personalities, and they don't know each other in the very beginning, and they could have entered interchangeable stories and stuff. And I feel like there just wasn't enough personality at each character to have certain griefs. Like, you never saw if anybody had, you know, I don't like the feeling of leather on me, or something like that. Like when the big guy is living out by himself in his little hut with Angelina Jolie, you have a opportunity to talk about certain things that characters do and do not like, and you know, where they've been and how they've done and stuff like that. But it feels like there wasn't enough character development. If you know any of your friends, you know that they do or do not like some sort of food or some sort of smell or something like that, and you've probably heard them talk about it. So it's like, if the first time that everybody gets together in, you know, 500 years or something like that, since they broke up in the Aztec thing, you would think that they would start talking about stuff like that. Oh, you remember when you didn't like that and you threw up all over the place, or whatever. Stories like that need to be told in order to add personality to the characters, such as these, in order to feel like they're more relatable, because these characters didn't necessarily feel relatable to me. A hard point to make is that the Celestials are doing good, but the framing of their purpose is sinister. If you need to know what framing is, I have videos on framing if you need to look at it, or you can just understand that this simple point of framing is basically how a person speaking or delivering a story puts into perspective something else, okay? So that's what framing is in a nutshell. The method of their creation is more brutal reality of life and death, and in the sense that something must die in order to create life elsewhere, which is the law of nature. This movie puts into the negative light, and I had a hard time understanding why, other than the fact that it's killing people. The only thing that I could collect that throughout the movie is the Eternals would begrudgingly follow their leader Erisham, the judge, while at the same time would give like an FU to their creator in their reason for their inception, which led me to believe that it was a sort of an anti-creationism method for existing, and mankind doesn't need to follow a creator. It was like they had this sort of, I don't like what you have done, and I am so angry at our creator kind of thing. And it was like, why did they need to make that a plot point? They could have had the bad guy be anything. Maybe the Celestials could have done something even worse, like of any kind of sort, but they went after a sort of creationism thing. And I'm not taking that personally. I'm just saying it was a very interesting plot point to make, because it made it feel very weak. It's like, I'm angry at the air kind of thing, because how the heck are you going to be able to fight these things? How are you going to be able to fight a god that doesn't seem to have any sort of weaknesses or vulnerabilities, because he is the one that created everything that you've lived on, and he created you yourself directly and told you, I am your creator. So it's very interesting that they threw that in as one of their plot points, as to, I am created and my creator is a butthead, So the evolved deviant becomes a villain in this story, and he served no plot point. They built him up to be this impressive character that was killing everybody off, and it could have been the same importance as Ultron in terms of the plot, but he was kind of killed at the end, and his sentience seems to serve no real purpose. It didn't really do anything for the plot. It was like he evolved and then he died. That was it. And then you walk away from the movie and you're like, okay, so he died. That's it. It didn't serve any purpose. It wasn't leading up to something. If they just didn't show him again, then we would have been wondering, oh, maybe he's going to be the bad guy in the next movie and kill people off or whatever. But they didn't really leave any room for that, which was kind of a drag. Cinematically, the movie looked amazing, and I loved the color palette. The CGI, when looked at their powers, was mostly good, but it seemed to find weaknesses, and the illusion of cinema fell through, and how the CGI reflected in the environment and how it interacted with it. Also, the format changed from scene to scene and sometimes shot to shot, from widescreen to full screen, so that was a little antagonizing. The dialogue was pretty corny during fight scenes, and some of the conversation felt childish and awkward with cliffhangers and unemotional banter, and the movie seemed to have sort of a Captain Marvel entitlement to it. And let me explain what that means. We all know what Captain Marvel is. Many of us have watched the movie and liked or disliked it. But Captain Marvel drove to, throughout the movie, take credit for all the good and awesome things that happened in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, such as the badass nature of Fury's eye scar, and that makes no sense to the lore already created behind it. The reason that Fury put the Avengers together in the first place, and it didn't all start with Iron Man like the lore had originally suggested before that movie came along with other things that we could easily bring in. This leads to the Eternals taking credit for stuff like the steam engine, the plow, the atom bomb, which in nowhere in the lore before them have given them credit to the Eternals, even though they have been around for thousands of years, and no one seems to know that they exist afterwards. In addition, their only relevance to the MCU as a whole is their references to Thor, Thanos, and some others that they created cameos of characters that hadn't been established in anything before, which makes the audience feel a so what. It didn't really give us a connection to the rest of the movie. They had cameos of characters that knew somebody, but it was more of a friend sort of way. It didn't really give us a sort of personality and say, oh my gosh, I've been waiting to see this character, like many of us hope to see it in Spider-Man and hopefully in the new Doctor Strange movie. The whole movie itself felt like there were plot points that were never really ever addressed, such as Sprite being able to teleport at the very end, the sudden ability to give Sprite age, which makes no sense, the random knife that mortally wounded Circe, and now a sentient deviant that has a random ability to swim dozens of miles extremely fast to be at the final fight at the end for some reason, and Festus can create anything out of thin air but needed the orb thing in Circe's neck in order to make an unrelated connection, and Druig not being able to put the Eternal to sleep for some reason. None of those things were actually addressed, and that added a frustration to me because I wanted to have things answered. I wanted there to be a reason behind these things that I don't want to have to look to the comics for, because if we are trying to make a good movie that resonates with people that do not read the comics, you want to make sure that you cover plot points. So that was kind of a difficult thing to have circling around, is saying that things are being answered when they're actually not, or things occurring that have no tangible evidence as to how they exist. And a point that I've made before, but I'll kind of get into a little bit more now, is how they existed with most of mankind's known recordings, but they have no references in the MCU until this point. And it seems to be a rather overlooked plot because they should have been talked about somewhere beforehand to help build up this movie. It's like we were expected to know the Avengers before they had their solo movies, which was the problem with Justice League. We don't have time to know the characters or be excited about their screen debut. When we look at the Eternals versus the Avengers, we had several movies leading up to the Avengers that made us get excited for the Avengers. The Eternals were kind of just dropped in the same way as Justice League was, because side by side, they had characters that were brought in that no one really had a personality with. You know, there was Batman and Superman, there was Wonder Woman, there was Flash, there was Cyborg, and in Eternals, I don't remember all their names, so forgive me for that one. Here they are on screen, and ta-da, they have their names there too. But that's part of the problem, is that they weren't really memorable characters. We already know Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Cyborg, Flash, because they've been established characters for a long time and greatly talked about. The Eternals is characters that not a lot of people talk about. There are people that wanted to watch this movie and say, this is a great movie, and we wanted to remember these characters. And you remember the actors, you remember what they did, but you don't remember the characters because they weren't that memorable, because there was nothing leading up to them that got us to like them. So what's the point of the moral compass of the movie? Well, it seems to me that there always has to be something special about you. superheroes that are created perfectly every time, that happens to be deaf to add character, love interests that have to have some sort of mysterious background in order to make them relevant, sexuality shoehorned in to add representation, all characters that were good ones had non-white ethnicities, and the 2 straight white people turned out to be bad. There was no clear villain to fight against since the deviant that was supposed to be the evil one was killed with no meaning to the plot, so they were only fighting against God and seemed to overcome it anyways because of the plot. In addition, if there was a deviant that was less sentient, he still would have served the same role, unlike Ultron did in the Avengers movies, which I keep using, but it's a fair point. In terms of cinema, this movie feels like it was made to just be made. It's argued that many Marvel movies aren't really cinema, and one famous quote by Martin Scorsese mentions this. In addition, Marvel's seemingly oversaturating the media, and fans are finding themselves underwhelmed after Endgame, because Marvel built up their phases so well that there doesn't seem to be anything better or more exciting. And finally, the movie has no connection to other Marvel movies, except a name and vague cameos that have some kind of relation to other characters. So it just left viewers feeling like they spend mindless amount of time watching a movie and then left them feeling no different than when they walked in. And that's a bummer. Marvel movies used to be something that people look forward to, and Spider-Man has been the most recent success in that sense, because people were looking forward to Spider-Man, and there are cameos because those are pre-existing characters. So the problem is, when you create a movie with characters that you don't know, no one's going to be excited about it, unless you have great actors standing behind them, which they did. But it still didn't help them as much as it could have, because team-up movies are definitely what people look forward to, but unless you have the characters individually suffering and struggling so we can get to know them, and then when loss happens, we can actually find ourselves sympathizing with them, we're not going to feel anything. Thank you for being here for my dissection. Hopefully, we can dissect more together, or you can listen to them, or if not. If you didn't like this, that's fine. Leave me a comment. That's okay. If you did like this, again, leave me a comment. Let me know what you guys think. This is probably the first of a couple that I'm going to do. I don't really do videos fairly often, but this is something that I enjoy doing. So, thank you for listening. Have a great day.